The first time the most feared alpha in the building carried my lunch tray, I thought he had mistaken me for someone else. That was the only explanation that made sense. At least, it was the only explanation my mind could accept. Cross Dominion Tower rose 63 stories above downtown Chicago, a monument of glass, steel, and quiet intimidation. Thousands of employees passed through its revolving doors every day, yet everyone knew the same rule. If Damian Cross entered a room, you stayed out of his way. He was the CEO, the founder, and according to the endless rumors floating through the building, the coldest alpha anyone had ever worked for. People lowered their voices when he walked past. Managers straightened their jackets. Executives reviewed presentations 3 times before stepping into meetings with him. Even the security guards seemed to stand a little taller when he appeared. I worked on the 18th floor in administrative operations, which meant I spent most of my days organizing reports, coordinating schedules, and making sure other people's problems didn't become emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. As far as anyone was concerned, I was invisible. And honestly, I preferred it that way. On that Tuesday afternoon, I was running late to lunch after helping another department solve a filing issue. By the time I reached the cafeteria, the rush was already in full swing. Every table seemed occupied. Conversations blended into a constant hum. The smell of grilled chicken, fresh bread, and coffee drifted through the crowded room. I grabbed a turkey sandwich, a cup of soup, and a bottle of water before joining the line at the register. The tray felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that I'd skipped breakfast again. Either way, my grip slipped slightly as I turned toward the seating area. The tray tilted, not enough to cause a disaster, but enough to make my stomach drop. I tightened my hold immediately, trying to recover before anyone noticed. Then a hand appeared beside mine. Large, steady, effortless. The weight disappeared from my arms. For a second, I just stared. The cafeteria noise seemed to vanish. My heart skipped once, then twice, because the person holding my lunch tray was Damian Cross. The Damian Cross, CEO, billionaire, living corporate legend, most feared alpha in the building. He didn't say a word. He simply adjusted his grip and continued walking forward, as if carrying another employee's lunch was the most natural thing in the world. I stood frozen for nearly 3 seconds before my brain started working again. "Sir," I managed to say, "I can take that." He glanced at me briefly. His expression remained unreadable. "You look tired." That was it. 4 words. Calm, direct, matter of fact. Then he kept walking. The entire cafeteria had gone silent. Hundreds of eyes followed us. I could practically feel the confusion spreading across the room. A vice president nearly dropped his coffee. Someone at a nearby table stared openly. 2 interns looked like they had just witnessed a solar eclipse. Meanwhile, Damian Cross continued carrying my tray toward an empty table near the windows. When he reached it, he placed everything down carefully. The soup, the sandwich, the water bottle, perfectly arranged. Then he nodded once. "Eat lunch, Aiden." My breath caught. I had never introduced myself to him. As far as I knew, we had never spoken before that moment. Yet somehow he knew my name. Before I could ask how, he turned and walked away. The cafeteria remained silent until the elevator doors closed behind him. Then the whispers began, and as I stood there staring at my untouched lunch, one impossible question echoed through my mind. Why did the most feared alpha in the building know who I was? Ever since that afternoon in the cafeteria, my life inside Cross Dominion Tower became strangely complicated. The problem was not what Damian Cross had done. The problem was that he kept doing things. Small things. Impossible things. Things that made no sense. By Friday, the entire 18th floor had developed a hobby of watching me whenever I left my desk. It was embarrassing. Every trip to the copier felt like a public event. Every walk through the hallway attracted curious looks. The rumors had spread faster than any official company announcement. Some people claimed I was secretly related to the CEO. Others insisted I must have done something extraordinary years ago. A few seemed convinced I was dating someone important in senior management. The truth was much less exciting. I had absolutely no idea what was happening. The next incident occurred 3 days after the cafeteria disaster. I was hurrying toward a conference room carrying 2 thick binders and a laptop when I noticed the elevator doors beginning to close. Normally, missing the elevator meant waiting another 5 minutes during peak traffic. I broke into a quick jog. The doors suddenly stopped. Then they opened again. Standing inside was Damien Cross. Every person in the elevator looked terrified. Damien simply held the door and waited. For me, I stepped inside, completely aware that half the building would probably hear about this before lunch. Nobody spoke during the ride. The silence felt almost unreal. When the elevator reached the 32nd floor, I finally gathered enough courage to say, "Thank you, sir." He looked up from the tablet in his hand. "You are welcome, Aiden." Then he returned to reading. As if this was perfectly normal. As if powerful CEOs routinely memorized the schedules of administrative employees. The following week became even stranger. One rainy Tuesday morning, I arrived at work soaked from an unexpected storm. Chicago weather had decided to ignore the forecast. My jacket was damp. My shoes were worse. I quietly settled at my desk and hoped nobody would notice. Around 10 o'clock, a package arrived. The receptionist handed it to me with an expression that suggested she desperately wanted answers. Inside was a brand new umbrella. Black. Professional. Expensive. There was no card. No message. Nothing except a small shipping label from a luxury retailer. I stared at it for several minutes. Then my phone buzzed with a company-wide notification announcing that Damien Cross had just returned from a business trip in New York. My stomach immediately dropped. There was no proof. No evidence. Yet somehow I knew. The umbrella remained under my desk for the rest of the day because I was too nervous to touch it. Then came the coffee incident. Every morning, I bought the same drink from the cafe in the lobby. Medium vanilla latte. Extra foam. One Thursday, the cashier smiled and handed it over before I even reached for my wallet. "Already paid for," she said. "By who?" I asked. The smile widened. "You know I cannot answer that." I absolutely did know. What frightened me was the growing realization that these moments were not random. They formed a pattern. Damien never lingered. He never explained anything. He never asked for gratitude. He simply appeared, solved a problem I had not mentioned, and disappeared again. The strangest part was that he always seemed to know exactly what I needed before I did. That realization followed me through the rest of the week. Then Friday evening arrived. I was leaving the building when I overheard two executives speaking near the revolving doors. He noticed before anyone else. One of them said quietly, "He always does." "Notices what?" the other asked. The executive glanced toward me, then toward the private elevator reserved for senior leadership. His expression became oddly thoughtful. People who matter. Before I could process what that meant, the elevator doors opened across the lobby. Damien Cross stepped out. For one brief moment, his eyes met mine. Then he gave the smallest nod and continued walking. Somehow, that tiny gesture left me more confused than everything else combined. The attention would have been easier to survive if it had stayed private. Unfortunately, nothing remained private inside Cross Dominion Tower for long. By the beginning of the next week, the whispers had evolved into theories, and the theories had evolved into accusations. People no longer looked at me with curiosity. They looked at me with suspicion. I noticed it first during a departmental meeting. Conversations stopped when I entered the conference room. A few employees exchanged glances. Someone quickly changed the subject. The atmosphere felt wrong. Heavy. Uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it and focus on work, but the tension followed me everywhere. At lunch, several tables that normally welcomed me suddenly seemed full. In the break room, discussions ended the moment I walked in. Even emails felt colder. More formal. More distant. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Then I overheard a conversation that removed all doubt. Two employees from another department were standing near the copy center. They did not realize I was around the corner. "Nobody gets that much attention from Damien Cross for no reason," one said. "Exactly," the other replied. "He must be doing something. Maybe he knows how to influence powerful people. Or maybe he is not as innocent as he looks." Their laughter echoed down the hallway. I stood frozen for several seconds before quietly walking away. The words should not have mattered. Yet they did. Because deep down, I had started asking the same question everyone else was asking. Why me? I was not exceptional. I was not important. I was certainly not part of Damien Cross's world. The more I thought about it, the less sense any of it made. By Wednesday, things became worse. An anonymous post appeared on an internal employee forum. The writer never mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew who it was about. The post suggested that certain employees were using personal relationships to gain advantages inside the company. Hundreds of comments followed. Some defended me. Many did not. Reading them felt like swallowing ice water. I closed the page and tried to focus on my work, but concentration became impossible. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, my manager stopped by my desk. Sandra Miller was usually cheerful and direct. Today, she seemed hesitant. "Are you doing okay?" she asked gently. I forced a smile. "Of course." She looked unconvinced. "You know, people talk when they do not understand something." I nodded. "I know." Sandra sighed. "For what it is worth, your work speaks for itself." I appreciated the kindness, but it did not erase the knot in my stomach. That evening, I stayed late to finish a quarterly report. Most employees had already gone home. The office was quiet except for the distant hum of computers and air conditioning. For the first time all week, I felt able to breathe. Then my email notification chimed. A new message had arrived. There was no subject line, no signature, just one sentence. "You should remember your place before people remind you." My hands went cold. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute. The message was not threatening, not directly, yet something about it felt cruel, deliberate, designed to hurt. I deleted it immediately, but the words lingered. Eventually, I packed my bag and headed toward the elevators. The floor was nearly empty. As I waited, exhaustion settled heavily across my shoulders. Maybe the rumors would fade. Maybe everyone would eventually move on. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and nearly stopped breathing. Damian Cross was already there, alone. For several silent seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his gaze shifted toward my face. His expression remained calm, but something changed in his eyes. It was as if he had noticed something I was trying very hard to hide. "Rough week?" he asked quietly. The simple question almost broke my composure. Somehow, out of thousands of people in the building, he was the first person who had actually noticed. For a moment, I forgot every careful response I had prepared during the elevator ride. I forgot the rumors. I forgot the anonymous message. I forgot the dozens of suspicious looks that had followed me through the week. All I could think about was the fact that Damian Cross had somehow noticed I was struggling. The elevator doors closed behind me, sealing us inside a quiet space lined with polished steel and soft lighting. I looked down at the floor indicator rather than at him. "It has been a long week," I admitted. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. People can be unkind when they do not understand something. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. Damian simply seemed to consider my words. "People often create explanations when they lack facts," he said finally. "Unfortunately, they rarely choose the correct explanation." I glanced up. He was looking straight ahead, hands folded behind his back. Calm, composed, impossible to read. "Does it bother you?" he asked. The question surprised me. Most executives would have ignored the situation entirely. "A little," I admitted. "I keep thinking it will stop." "It will." The certainty in his voice caught my attention. Not confidence. Certainty. As if the outcome had already been decided. Before I could ask what he meant, the elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Damian stepped out first. Then he paused and looked back toward me. "Do not skip breakfast tomorrow." My heart nearly stopped. He gave a small nod and disappeared into the lobby crowd before I could respond. I stood frozen inside the elevator. Breakfast? How could he possibly know that? The next morning, I arrived at work determined to stop overthinking everything. Clearly, there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe he had seen me looking tired. Maybe someone had mentioned my habit of skipping meals. Maybe there were simple answers I was missing. That determination lasted exactly 27 minutes. At 9:12 in the morning, an assistant from executive administration appeared beside my desk carrying a paper bag. "Delivery for Aiden Brooks," she said. Confused, I accepted it. Inside was a breakfast sandwich, fresh fruit, and a bottle of orange juice. There was no note, no card, no explanation. I stared at the contents while several nearby coworkers openly watched. One of them actually dropped a pen. Another nearly spilled coffee. The rumors that had been fading slightly over the past 2 days immediately returned with new energy. By lunchtime, I heard 3 entirely new conspiracy theories. By 3 o'clock, someone claimed I was secretly working on a special executive project. By 5 o'clock, another person insisted I must have known Damian for years. The strange thing was that part of me wanted to believe that last theory, because the alternative was somehow even more confusing. Late Friday afternoon, I received a call from the archives department on the lower levels. They needed help locating several old project records. Since everyone else was busy, I volunteered. The archive room occupied a quiet section of the building rarely visited by most employees. Rows of shelves stretched across thousands of square feet. Old reports, historical contracts, decades of company records. I spent nearly an hour searching through storage files before finding the documents they needed. As I returned a box to a shelf, something caught my eye. A familiar name printed on an old visitor log. Aiden Brooks. My name. My breath caught. The date beside it was from 6 years ago, long before I ever worked at Cross Dominion, long before any of this began. And directly beneath my name was another entry. Damian Cross. For several seconds, I simply stared at the faded visitor log. The paper looked old enough to belong in a museum. Dust coated the edges of the storage box, and the fluorescent lights above hummed softly in the otherwise silent archive room. Yet there it was. My name. Aiden Brooks. 6 years ago. Directly above Damian Cross. My pulse quickened. I tried to remember what had happened 6 years earlier. At the time, I was a college student juggling classes, part-time jobs, and a future that felt uncertain. I had never worked for Cross Dominion. I had never met Damian Cross. At least, I did not think I had. Confused, I carefully pulled the log closer. The entry included the date, visitor badge number, and location. It referenced a community business seminar held inside the building. Slowly, fragmented memories surfaced. A rainy day, a borrowed suit that did not fit properly, a university program that offered students the chance to attend networking events downtown. I remembered feeling completely out of place among professionals and executives, but the details remained blurry. Before I could examine the records further, my phone vibrated. Sandra was calling. Aiden, where are you? She asked immediately. Still in archives. You need to leave soon. The weather is getting bad. I glanced toward the small basement-level window. Rain hammered against the glass. I will head out now. After returning the files, I made my way toward the lobby. By the time I reached street level, the storm had intensified. Sheets of rain swept across downtown Chicago. Wind rattled signs and sent pedestrians rushing for cover. Fortunately, I still had the expensive umbrella that had mysteriously appeared weeks earlier. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my landlord. Water pipe issue. Maintenance entering apartments tonight. Please confirm access. Distracted, I typed a quick response while walking toward the crosswalk. The next few seconds happened so fast that I barely processed them. A bicycle courier rounded the corner unexpectedly. I stepped backward to avoid colliding with him. My shoe slipped against the rain-soaked pavement. Suddenly the ground seemed to disappear beneath me. Before I could hit the sidewalk, a strong arm caught my shoulder. The umbrella tumbled from my hand. My heart hammered wildly as I struggled to regain balance. Careful. The familiar voice came from directly beside me. I looked up. Damian Cross stood there, rain falling across the shoulders of his dark coat. For the first time since I had known him, he did not appear calm. His jaw was tight. His expression carried unmistakable concern. Are you hurt? He asked. No, my voice sounded breathless. Just embarrassed. Relief flashed across his face so quickly I almost missed it. Then he bent down, retrieved the fallen umbrella, and handed it back to me. You should not be walking while answering messages. I laughed nervously. That sounds suspiciously like something my mother used to say. To my surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not a full smile. Just enough to transform his entire expression. For a brief moment, he looked less like the intimidating CEO everyone feared and more like an ordinary man. Then his gaze shifted to the folder still tucked beneath my arm. Archives? He asked. My stomach tightened. Yes. Find anything interesting? The question sounded casual. Too casual. I hesitated before answering. Actually, I found something strange. His eyes focused entirely on me. What was that? I swallowed. A visitor log from 6 years ago. The faint smile vanished immediately, and for the first time since meeting Damian Cross, I saw a genuine surprise on his face. Rain continued falling around us as neither of us spoke. Cars moved through the wet streets. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Yet for a few strange seconds, it felt as though the entire city had faded into the background. Damian Cross was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not cold, not unreadable, caught. As if I had accidentally opened a door he never intended anyone to find. A visitor log, he repeated carefully. Yes. I adjusted my grip on the folder. From 6 years ago. His gaze drifted briefly toward the street before returning to me. And you found your name. It was not a question. My pulse quickened. You already know that I did. A faint smile touched his face. Not amusement. Resignation. The kind that comes when hiding something is no longer possible. I suppose I do. The answer only deepened my confusion. How? I asked. For a moment, Damien seemed to consider whether he should answer. Then he glanced toward a small coffee shop across the street. Would you like to sit down? 20 minutes later, we occupied a quiet corner table near the window. Outside, rain slid down the glass in silver streams. Inside, warm light reflected across polished wood surfaces. I wrapped both hands around a cup of tea while Damien sat across from me with black coffee. For the first time, there were no employees watching us. No executives. No rumors. Just two people sitting in a coffee shop. 6 years ago, Damien said quietly, Cross Dominion hosted a mentorship event for college students. The memory stirred faintly. I remember attending something like that. You arrived late. I blinked. How do you know that? Because I was there. My heart skipped. Damien leaned back slightly. Most students spent the day trying to impress executives. They rehearsed introductions. They handed out resumes. They competed for attention. He looked down at his coffee. You were different. The memory became clearer. Fragments returned one piece at a time. The rain. The crowded lobby. The nervous excitement. I do not remember meeting you, I admitted. You did not. That answer surprised me. Then how do you remember me? For the first time since entering the coffee shop, Damien smiled fully. It transformed him. Removed years from his appearance. Softened every sharp edge. Because of what happened afterward. He glanced toward the rain-covered window. The event ended late. Most people left immediately. Suddenly, another memory surfaced. A bus stop. Heavy rain. A broken umbrella. There was someone outside, I said slowly. Damien nodded. There was. The image sharpened further. I remembered seeing a man standing alone in the storm near the edge of the sidewalk. His expensive suit had been soaked. His expression had looked exhausted. At the time, I had assumed he was another attendee waiting for transportation. You offered half your umbrella, Damien said. My breath caught. That was you. Yes. I stared at him. The memory felt almost unreal. It was just an umbrella. No, his voice remained calm. It was not. The coffee shop seemed unusually quiet. Damien folded his hands together. You spent 15 minutes standing in the rain because you did not want a stranger getting soaked. I laughed softly. That does not sound very impressive. It was to me. Something in his expression made my chest tighten. Why? Damien looked out the window for several seconds before answering. Because that week had been one of the worst periods of my life. Everyone wanted something from me. Contracts. Favors. Opportunities. Money. His gaze returned to mine. You were the only person who approached me without wanting anything at all. The realization hit me slowly. 6 years. All this time. The lunch tray. The umbrella. The breakfast. The elevator. He had not noticed me recently. He had remembered me all along. The revelation should have changed everything. In some ways, it did. For the first time, Damien Cross no longer felt like an impossible mystery standing at the top of a corporate tower. He felt human. Real. Yet the answers I had spent weeks searching for created a new problem neither of us anticipated. By Monday morning, someone had photographed us leaving the coffee shop together. The image spread through the company before lunch. It was not scandalous. It was not inappropriate. It simply showed the two of us walking beneath the same umbrella while rain fell across the city. Somehow that was enough. The rumors exploded with renewed force. Employees who had finally started losing interest suddenly became obsessed again. Every conversation seemed to stop when I entered a room. Every glance carried questions. I tried focusing on work, but the atmosphere inside the building felt different now. Sharper. Less curious. More hostile. 3 days later, the real problem arrived. I was halfway through reviewing quarterly vendor reports when Sandra appeared beside my desk. Her face looked unusually pale. Aiden, she said quietly, Human Resources needs to see you. My stomach dropped immediately. Why? She hesitated. I do not know. That answer told me everything. 20 minutes later, I sat inside a conference room facing 2 Human Resources representatives and a compliance officer. A stack of documents rested on the table between us. The atmosphere felt cold and formal. Mr. Brooks, one representative began. Questions have been raised regarding confidential company information. I blinked. What? The compliance officer slid several pages across the table. Certain executive planning documents were accessed from your employee credentials. My pulse surged. That is impossible. The records indicate otherwise. I grabbed the papers. The login information displayed my employee identification number, my workstation, my account. Yet the documents listed were files I had never opened. Some belonged to departments I could not even access. There has to be a mistake, I said. I did not do this. The representatives exchanged careful looks. They were not accusing me directly. Not yet. But they were no longer treating me like an innocent employee either. By the end of the meeting, I was placed on temporary administrative review while the investigation continued. The news spread through Cross-Dominion Tower with terrifying speed. By afternoon, everyone seemed to know. The whispers became open conversations. The suspicious looks turned into certainty. Suddenly, the narrative made sense to people. Of course, Aiden received special treatment. Of course, Damian Cross paid attention to him. Of course, there had been secrets. Employees began connecting imaginary dots until they created a story far more dramatic than reality. I returned to my apartment that evening feeling completely exhausted. For the first time since joining the company, I considered resigning. Maybe that was what everyone expected. Maybe it would make the situation easier. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from coworkers. Some offered support. Others asked questions I could not answer. I ignored all of them. Then a new email appeared. Unlike the previous anonymous message, this one contained only a single sentence. You should leave before the truth comes out. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Something inside me finally snapped. Not anger. Not fear. Just exhaustion. I opened my laptop and began drafting a resignation letter. If the company no longer trusted me, there was no reason to stay. The cursor blinked across the screen while I searched for the right words. Then my phone rang. The caller identification displayed a number I had never seen before. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. Hello. Silence lasted for a second. Then a familiar voice spoke. Calm. Controlled. Unmistakable. Do not send that letter, Aiden. My breath caught. How did you know? On the other end of the line, Damian Cross answered without hesitation. Because someone spent months creating this situation. For several seconds, I sat motionless at my kitchen table with the resignation letter still open on my laptop screen. Damian's words echoed through my mind. Someone spent months creating this situation. The statement changed everything. Until that moment, I had assumed the investigation was the result of misunderstandings, rumors, and bad luck. Now I realized there was something far more deliberate happening behind the scenes. What do you mean? I asked quietly. On the other end of the call, Damian remained calm. I mean the access records were manipulated. My heart pounded. You already know that? I know enough to tell you not to resign. I leaned back in my chair. Then why has nobody stopped this? A brief silence followed. Because proving something and suspecting something are two different things. The answer frustrated me, but it also sounded painfully logical. Damian continued. Tomorrow morning, there will be an executive meeting. I need you to trust me until then. Trust him. A few weeks earlier, that request would have sounded impossible. Now it felt strangely easy. All right, I said. I trust you. The silence that followed lasted only a second, yet something about it felt important. Thank you, Aiden. Damian replied quietly before ending the call. The next morning, Cross-Dominion Tower felt different. Employees moved through the lobby with unusual energy. Rumors about the investigation had reached every floor. People stopped talking when I entered elevators. Some stared openly. Others avoided eye contact altogether. By 10 o'clock, a company-wide announcement appeared. Mandatory executive presentation. Attendance required for all department leaders. Live broadcast available across every office floor. The message immediately triggered another wave of speculation. Nobody knew what was happening. Neither did I. At 11 sharp, conference rooms throughout the building filled with employees watching the live stream. I sat near the back of a crowded room on the 18th floor. Hundreds of faces stared toward the large screen mounted on the wall. The executive boardroom appeared on camera. Senior leadership occupied their seats. Human resources representatives sat along one side. Compliance officers sat along the other. Then Damian Cross entered. The room became silent. He walked to the front without notes or prepared remarks. His expression remained calm, but there was an unmistakable focus in his eyes. "Thank you for attending," he began. "Today we are addressing concerns regarding internal security and employee misconduct." Every conversation vanished instantly. Damien continued. "Over the past several weeks, false information has circulated throughout this company." He paused. Some of it involved one employee in particular. My pulse quickened. Across the room, several people glanced toward me. Damien pressed a button on the presentation screen. New documents appeared. Security reports. Login records. Audit findings. "Our investigation is complete," he said. "The evidence confirms that unauthorized access records were intentionally fabricated." Audible gasps filled the conference room around me. Damien displayed another report. Then another. Each document revealed the same conclusion. The login history connected to my account had been altered. The accusations were false. The investigation had uncovered months of manipulation performed by a senior operations director attempting to damage multiple employees for personal advancement. More evidence appeared. Email records, system logs, internal communications. The story unraveled piece by piece until there was no room left for doubt. By the end, every accusation against me had completely collapsed. Relief washed through me so suddenly that I nearly stopped breathing. Yet Damien was not finished. He stepped away from the screen and looked directly into the camera. "There is one final matter," he said. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. His gaze remained steady. "Throughout this situation, one employee was subjected to unfair assumptions, rumors, and speculation." Silence filled every conference room. Then Damien spoke the words nobody expected. "The employee I trust most in this company is Aiden Brooks." The silence that followed Damien's statement seemed to spread across every floor of Cross Dominion Tower. In the conference room around me, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For weeks, employees had built stories about me from rumors and assumptions. In a single sentence, Damien had destroyed every one of them. The meeting ended shortly afterward, but the impact remained. As people slowly filed out of conference rooms and returned to their departments, the atmosphere felt completely different. Some coworkers approached me to apologize. Others looked embarrassed. A few simply smiled and nodded before continuing on their way. For the first time in months, I could walk through the building without feeling the weight of judgment following me. Yet the person I wanted to speak with most was nowhere to be found. Damien disappeared into executive meetings for the remainder of the day. By 6 o'clock, most employees had gone home. I stayed behind to finish several reports that had been delayed during the investigation. The office felt peaceful again. Familiar. Safe. Around 7:30, I finally shut down my computer and headed toward the elevator. As the doors opened on the lobby level, I found Damien standing alone near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Evening sunlight painted the skyline gold. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked over. "You did not have to do that," I said quietly. Damien looked at me. "Yes, I did. You could have cleared my name without saying everything else." A faint smile appeared. "Perhaps." I shook my head. The entire company heard it. That was the point. The answer made me laugh despite myself. For several seconds, we stood together watching traffic move through the streets below. The city seemed calmer than usual. Or maybe I was. Eventually, I turned toward him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why keep remembering me?" The question lingered between us. Damien's expression softened. "Because some moments matter more than people realize." He looked out toward the skyline. 6 years ago, I was surrounded by successful people, powerful people, important people. Yet the person I remembered was a college student standing in the rain, sharing an umbrella with a stranger. I felt my face warm. "I still think you are exaggerating." "I am not." His voice remained steady. "Kindness is rare when nobody expects a reward." The lobby grew quiet again. Then Damien reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed something small. A photograph. He handed it to me carefully. I looked down. The image showed two people standing beneath a slightly crooked umbrella outside Cross Dominion Tower. The picture was grainy and old, clearly taken from a distance. One of them was me, 6 years younger. The other was Damien. I stared at the photograph in disbelief. "You kept this?" "Yes." "For 6 years?" "Yes." I laughed softly, unable to believe it. Damien's smile deepened. "I told you I remembered." We stood there for a long moment, looking at the photograph together. Then an announcement echoed through the nearly empty lobby. reminding employees that the building would close soon. I carefully handed the picture back. What happens now? I asked. Damien considered the question. Then he nodded toward the elevators. Now, I believe it is time for dinner. I blinked. Are you asking me to dinner? I am. And if I say yes? For the first time since I had known him, Damien looked completely relaxed. Then we stopped letting 6 years pass before sharing a meal. I smiled before I could stop myself. In that case, yes. Together we walked toward the exit. As we passed the cafeteria entrance, I noticed a familiar lunch tray sitting on a nearby counter waiting to be returned. The sight made me laugh. Damien followed my gaze and shook his head with amused resignation. Then, without being asked, he picked it up and carried it the rest of the way. Some things, apparently, never changed. And for the first time, I was very happy about that. What would you have done if you were in this situation? Tell us in the comments. If you love Alpha and Omega stories filled with passion, loyalty, heartbreak, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.